The kid sneered as he walked past my old Chevy. Seriously, man. You still drive that thing? His voice cut through the cold November air like it had something to prove. I didn't answer right away. Just leaned against the tailgate, watching the rust glint under the morning sun. That heap belongs in a museum, he chuckled, snapping photos of the house behind me. And this? He jabbed his phone toward the chipped paint on the front porch. Let's be honest, this place is begging to be bulldozed. I studied him. Slim suit jacket too thin for the weather, clipboard under one arm like it made him important. He circled the property like he already owned it. My investors want clean lines. Open concept. Think Scandinavian meets Boulder luxury. He gestured with wide hands, pacing the yard. We tear this down, rebuild modern, triple your return in 9 months. You'll thank me. He stopped a few feet in front of me, smiling like a man who thought he'd already won. Look, Mr. Dakota. You seem like a good guy. But you're sitting on dead equity. The house is old. You're old. This? He waved at my truck again. It's time to let the past go. Still, I said nothing. Just reached into the bed of that old truck, pulled out a weathered canvas satchel, and walked past him toward the garage. The wooden door creaked open on hinges older than both of us. Dust motes danced in the slanted light. Inside, the air smelled like pine oil and copper. I set the bag down on the workbench, slowly unzipping it. Blueprints, rolled and yellowed from decades of storage. My grandmother's handwritten notes. Site maps. Surveyor's stamps from the 1930s. A tribal certificate bearing our family name and the words, designated sacred ground, traditional cultural property. I heard his footsteps behind me. What is this, some kind of history project? I unrolled the map. There, traced in red ink, was the foundation beneath this house, an original ceremonial site tied to the Dakota line. One of the last documented tribal locations in the region still held by descendants. He frowned, leaned closer. Wait, what am I looking at? I didn't smile. Just pointed to the federal seal affixed to the document. That, I said calmly, is why you're not tearing anything down. He blinked. Is this real? I handed him a letter, embossed with the insignia of the National Park Service. Filed. Recorded. Protected. He swallowed. But, I already made calls. We had contractors ready. My name's on the proposal. Your name's not on this land, I said quietly. And now, it never will be. He backed out of the garage slowly, the weight of what he almost disturbed beginning to settle in. His face, so smug minutes before, was pale now. His voice unsteady. You're saying the land can't be developed? Legally, I said, you so much as dig a post hole, and you'll have federal protection, tribal council, and the preservation office on your front lawn. He opened his mouth. Closed it. For the first time all morning, he had nothing clever to say. As he left, the wind stirred the loose corner of the blueprint on my bench. My grandmother's initials peeked out in faded ink. Her voice echoed in my memory, protect what they don't understand, Jed. Because they'll never see its worth, until they can't have it. She was right. He mocked the rust. But he didn't know what was buried beneath it. Before my grandmother passed, she used to say, Jed, this house isn't just wood and shingles. It's where the earth remembers us. At the time, I thought it was just her way of being poetic. But she meant it, literally. Every nail in that house, every floorboard, held more than memories. It held meaning. I grew up on that land, 4 acres just outside Taos, where the soil runs red and the wind always feels like it's whispering something. My parents left when I was 10, city life pulling them away. Grandma stayed. Raised me with calloused hands and soft eyes, humming old songs while she cooked, her braid always tied with that same turquoise clasp. The house was already old back then. It leaned like it was tired, but it never fell. I remember cold mornings when I'd wake up to the smell of wood smoke and blue corn pancakes. The floors would creak under her feet as she moved through the kitchen. We had no Wi-Fi, no dishwasher, no thermostat. Just the fire, the sky, and a transistor radio that only played one channel. She taught me how to listen, to the wind, to the land, to the stories in silence. While other kids had cartoons and mall trips, I had root cellar storms and sagebrush hikes. And I never felt like I was missing anything. I started fixing things around the house when I was 12. First it was the screen door, then the gutters, then the shingles on the west side. I'd scrounge for parts at the scrapyard and haul them home in that old Chevy. Some days, she'd come out to the porch with lemonade and just sit, watching me with this soft pride that filled the whole yard. "Everything you fix," she said once, "you make sacred. Because you give it your time." That stuck with me. After she passed, I thought about leaving. The world outside had sped up without us. There were no neighbors left who remembered my name. The stores had changed. Even the air felt different, less forgiving. But something kept me here. The garage became my sanctuary. Inside were drawers full of old paperwork, tribal records, maps, blueprints. My grandfather's surveying tools still hung on the wall. He'd mapped parts of this region for the tribal council back in the 40s. His notes were written in pencil on yellowed paper, and I started reading them one night during a thunderstorm. I ended up staying awake until morning. That's when I first found mention of the ceremonial ground. A line in a map. A symbol I didn't recognize, traced in red. My grandmother's handwriting beside it, "Protect this." It took months of phone calls and quiet conversations with tribal historians to piece it all together. Our land, my home, was built on one of the last documented sacred meeting places for our people. The Dakota clan had kept it hidden through generations, not out of fear, but respect. And because no one had ever come looking. Now, the records were brittle. The history half forgotten. But I had them. And I guarded them like a gatekeeper. I didn't tell anyone. Not because I didn't trust people, but because trust is like dry timber, one spark and it's gone. Developers had started circling. Real estate whispers about undervalued properties with flip potential. Then the town started offering incentives to modernize or sell. I knew what was coming. I kept the house quiet. Unassuming. Let the siding age. Let the porch sag just a little. Played the part of the quiet old guy with the rusty truck and oil-stained driveway. And while they chuckled at my thrift store jackets and half-dead rose bushes, I was preserving something bigger. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't even angry. But I was ready. I kept everything organized in the garage: blueprints, notarized declarations, tribal acknowledgments, letters from the state historic office. The map, always folded neatly in its sleeve. And the real crown jewel, a letter from the Department of the Interior, acknowledging the land's eligibility for historic and cultural protection pending submission. All it needed was one trigger, a development permit, an invasive dig, a public complaint, and the whole process would activate. Until then, I waited. And in the meantime, I lived simply. Drove my truck once a week into town for groceries. Tended the old garden rows that hadn't yielded much in years. Sat on the porch at sunset with a cup of chicory coffee, watching the shadows crawl up the mountains. My truck. It wasn't just a vehicle. It was the last thing my grandfather and I worked on together before he died. Rebuilt the engine from scratch. Replaced the bed with salvaged oak from a collapsed barn in Arroyo Seco. The rust on the wheel wells. Earned. Every inch had a story. People laughed at it. But I didn't care. That truck carried my grandmother's cedar chest to the funeral home. It hauled lumber when I fixed the roof. It moved friends in hard times. And now, it carried the proof of everything that would stop them from turning my family's land into some plastic, open-concept travesty. They never looked beyond the surface. But the house saw it all. And the land remembered. His name was Chase. Of course it was. Chase Whitman, according to the card he flicked onto my porch railing like it was supposed to impress me. Regional Development Lead. Whitman Property Solutions. His teeth were too white, his hair too perfect, his handshake firm but hollow. "I'll be honest with you, Mr. Takota," he said, glancing around like the place offended him. "This property's underperforming. It's got good bones, but everything else. It's a teardown waiting to happen." He wore sneakers that probably cost more than I'd earned last month, stepping over the cracked path like it might stain him. "This neighborhood's being reborn," he went on, arms spread like he was blessing the land. "And this house." He grinned. "Well, let's just say it's holding the rest of us back." I nodded slowly, letting him talk. He launched into his pitch: off-market offers, zero closing costs, cash deals, 7-day turnaround. We'd bring in modern elevation, high-efficiency glass, solar integration. Your place is a Pinterest board from 1972, but we could make it something special. I leaned on my cane. Special for who? He smirked. For people who want to live here. People who see potential. Look, man, I don't mean to be rude. I get it, you've got memories here. But this place is obsolete. Obsolete. That word rang in my chest like a bad church bell. I watched him walk toward the garage like he owned it already. His phone was out, taking video. We could do black siding. Big corner windows. Maybe even a rooftop deck. People pay top dollar for views of these mountains. He tried the door, found it locked. He turned. "You live alone?" he asked, casually, like he was scoping out vulnerability. I didn't answer. He kept talking. "My father was like you. Old school. Built a house by hand, refused to sell. Said it was about roots. You know what he got in the end? Code violations and a foreclosure sign." He laughed. I had to evict him myself. My hand tightened around the cane. "Is that supposed to be comforting?" He waved dismissively. "I'm saying we can help you get ahead of that curve. Before this place collapses." He stepped closer. "No offense, but your truck, your roof, your porch, this whole setup screaming for someone to rescue it." He actually looked at me with pity. "Man, you don't have to keep pretending this life still works. Let us build you something better." There it was. He didn't just want the land. He wanted the right to erase everything that came before. He wanted my surrender, wrapped in a thank you card. I could hear my grandmother's voice then, sharp in my memory: "They don't see what you're preserving, because they never carried it." Chase slipped a folder from his satchel and set it on the porch rail next to his card. "Take your time. Offers like this don't last long, especially once zoning starts shifting. Clock's ticking, my friend." He turned toward the street, tossed a final look over his shoulder. "Nice truck," he smirked. "Reminds me of a scrapyard I passed last week." He drove off with his music too loud, tires crunching over the gravel that had been laid by my grandfather in 1952. I stood there long after he was gone, listening to the hum of insects, the creak of the porch swing in the wind. Inside the folder were photos of other homes they'd demolished. Before and after shots. The after-s all looked the same, gray cubes with oversized windows and no soul. The before shots looked like mine. Weathered. Rooted. Real. There was an offer sheet at the back. 6 figures. Clean terms. Opportunity to exit gracefully. Exit. Like I was some failing business, not a man with 50 years of history under his roof. I closed the folder. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of the offer, but because of how easy it was for him to say it. To look at my life and see waste. To mock the truck that had carried more than he'd ever understand. He didn't see the night I rushed my grandmother to the hospital in that truck. Or the 10 winters it carried firewood from the ridge. Or the summer I rebuilt the fence post by post, hauling timber in its bed. He didn't care. He wanted the land. He wanted the quiet scraped away, the history bulldozed, the old stories flattened under glossy tile. And he thought I'd just step aside. For the first time in years, I felt anger, not grief. Not sadness. Not loss. But something deep and steady, like a mountain shifting under the soil. They'd spent so long thinking the old man was asleep. But I was awake now. The days after Chase left blurred into one another. Cold mornings. Lukewarm coffee. A silence that pressed against the windows like fog. I stopped turning on the radio. Even its static felt too loud. There was no music, no conversation, just the old creak of wood expanding in the chill, and the distant moan of coyotes reminding me I was alone. I walked the halls of my house like a ghost haunting a place I once called home. My grandmother's chair still faced the fireplace. Her throw blanket still draped over the back, edges worn thin from decades of use. I couldn't bring myself to move it. Sometimes I'd find myself sitting on the floor of the living room, tracing the knots in the wood with my thumb, remembering how she used to hum when she swept the floor. Always barefoot. Always in rhythm with something I couldn't hear, but she could. I didn't leave the house for 3 days. Didn't even start the truck. The proposal folder stayed on the porch for a while, until the wind finally swept it off the rail. I left it there, pages scattered in the rose bushes, slowly softening under dew and sun. One night, I tried to throw out the blueprints, the tribal documents I'd guarded like gold. I had them in my hands, standing by the old burn barrel behind the garage. I lit a match. But I couldn't drop them. Not because I needed proof. But because I wasn't ready to become someone who gave up just because someone younger laughed. Still, I felt worn down. Not by Chase. Not even by the insult. By time. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. Deep grooves under tired eyes. Skin like dry bark. The weight of generations pressing down on aging bones. Who was I protecting this for? My family had all moved on. The cousins who once ran barefoot through the sagebrush now lived in cities with walls of glass and white noise. No one came to visit anymore. My mailbox was full of offers and bills. Never letters. Was I just clinging to a memory no one else valued? Sometimes at night, I'd sit in the truck with the garage door open, the engine off, hand resting on the steering wheel. Not going anywhere. Just sitting in the smell of oil and old leather, pretending the world outside had slowed down long enough for me to catch up. I thought about selling. Not for the money, but for the release. Let someone else carry the weight. Let someone else worry about the cracks in the plaster and the stories in the soil. I thought about it more than once. I even dialed the number on Chase's card. But I never pressed call. Because every time I got that close, I'd hear her voice again. My grandmother, calm and firm, saying what she'd told me every winter when snow caved in the fence line or the well froze solid. Don't quit in the cold, Jed. Wait until spring. You'll see clearer then. She always said the land talks loudest in the thaw. So I waited. I pulled the blinds. Let the dishes pile in the sink. Walked the perimeter of the house in the mornings just to make sure it still stood. Not because I thought it would fall, but because I needed to remind myself that I hadn't. I found her old journal one night in the bottom drawer of the hall chest. Inside were pressed flowers, names of people I barely remembered, and a single sentence written in bold ink across a torn page. One day, they'll come to take what they think is dead. Let them come. They don't know where the roots are. I sat there in the hallway with that page in my lap for over an hour. It didn't feel like inspiration. Not yet. But it felt like the beginning of remembering. Of why I stayed. And why I couldn't leave. It started with a soft rain tapping the garage roof. Spring had arrived quietly, without permission. The kind of morning where the clouds don't rush, and the soil smells like it remembers something you've forgotten. I sat at the workbench, staring at the old binder. I hadn't opened it in months. The zipper stuck halfway, like even it had grown stiff with waiting. But when it finally gave, the leather curled back to reveal the stack of documents I'd protected all my life: maps, blueprints, photographs. Some had edges worn thin by years of handling. Some were sealed in plastic sleeves with hand-labeled tabs. One by one, I laid them out on the bench. My grandfather's original site sketch. My grandmother's notes in cursive faded to a whisper. Tribal correspondence confirming the presence of ceremonial earthworks under the eastern edge of the property. It was all still here. Everything Chase had tried to mock. Everything he'd failed to see. At the bottom of the pile, folded between two layers of parchment, was the map. Hand-drawn. Red ink tracing the original meeting grounds. A sun symbol to the north. The Dakota name, marked with a single feather beside it. I reached for the letter from the Department of the Interior, the one they'd sent 6 years ago after I'd inquired about cultural preservation status. It had sat dormant, waiting for formal filing, waiting for someone to give it reason. Maybe I hadn't been ready then. But I was now. I didn't call Chase. I didn't return the voicemails he left, 2 weeks apart, increasingly aggressive. Instead, I called the tribal office. The woman who answered knew my name. Mr. Dakota, she said, we've been hoping you'd follow up. They sent an agent within days, Jolene Two Rivers. Soft-spoken. Sharp eyes. She walked the property with reverence, not curiosity. She knew the symbols. Knew the lineage. She recognized the map's markings before I even explained. When she spoke, it was like she was talking to the land itself. Within a week, the wheels began to turn. The tribal preservation officer reached out to the State Historic Preservation Office. A Section 106 review was initiated. They pulled records, assessed maps, compared overlays. Every step confirmed what I already knew: this wasn't just a house, it was a piece of cultural inheritance. And by law, it had to be respected. The letter came 2 months later, stamped and signed. The Dakota property is a recognized traditional cultural property, TCP, eligible for listing under the National Historic Preservation Act. Any development or disturbance without tribal consultation is prohibited. It was more than paperwork. It was armor. The house was now protected. The soil under it, too. The sacred story hidden in its beams could no longer be bought, bulldozed, or flipped. I framed the letter and hung it in the hallway across from my grandmother's portrait. I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. Instead, I began to walk differently. I stood taller. When I drove the truck into town, I didn't flinch at the looks. Let them laugh. Let them see rust. They didn't know what rode in the back of that truck. Knowledge. Lineage. Law. I repaired the screen door. Rehung the sagging gate. Planted new sage near the porch and fixed the cracked tiles in the kitchen. Not for resale. Not for optics. For pride. Because now I remembered, this wasn't a relic. It was a cornerstone. And I was its steward, not its prisoner. Chase tried to come back. He showed up on a Friday, standing at the edge of the driveway with another man in a golf shirt and an eager smile. I didn't meet them outside. I let them sweat in the sun. Eventually, I opened the door and handed Chase a copy of the federal letter. He read it. His smile faded. "You're serious?" he asked. I didn't answer. Just watched him. The other man squinted at the signature. "This makes it, what?" Protected? Untouchable, I said. Chase tried to bluff. You know what you're giving up? You could have had triple digits, easy. I stepped off the porch, calm and measured. There are some things worth more than 3 commas on a check. He turned to leave, muttering something under his breath. This time, I didn't feel rage. Or fear. Or even vindication. Just peace. I walked back into the house, poured myself a cup of coffee, and sat by the window. Outside, the rain had started again, soft, steady. My grandmother used to say rain like that meant the land was listening. And for the first time in a long time, I knew it was. Chase didn't stop calling right away. First came the friendly check-ins. Then the vague threats, dressed up as concern. You know, Jed, these designations, they're not always permanent. There's politics involved. I let the voicemails pile up. When he emailed, I replied with a PDF attachment, the full tribal resolution and federal TCP acknowledgement, each line highlighted. No message. Just facts. That was my first retaliation. Silence, and the cold, inarguable weight of the truth. Then I started doing something that must have really gotten under his skin. I began fixing things. Not hiding, not guarding, restoring. Repainting the trim, replacing shingles, digging out the irrigation lines to revive the garden my grandmother once loved. The truck made weekly trips to the lumber yard again, its bed carrying reclaimed wood and soil. I knew Chase would notice. He had a habit of driving by in his glossy SUV with the tinted windows, thinking he was discreet. He wasn't. I made sure to wave every time. And I always made sure he saw the tribal flag I'd now hung under the front awning, fluttering just below the American one. I wasn't just preserving anymore. I was displaying. Teaching. Claiming. The best revenge is not fire. It's frost. It's control. Meanwhile, the land began to breathe again. As if it knew it was safe. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact now stopped by, curious about the changes. Didn't think you were still working out here, one said. I never stopped, I replied. I took my time. I didn't hire help. Each board I replaced, each layer of paint I brushed, was an act of quiet resistance. And still, Chase pushed. One afternoon, I found a letter from a zoning consultant tucked under my gate. Friendly tone, full of coded language. A developer is seeking public comment regarding potential infrastructure improvement to this area. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the letter to Jolene Two Rivers and CC'd the State Historic Preservation Office. Her reply came within an hour, "We'll handle it. Don't worry." Next week, the consultant sent me another note, "Disregard our previous outreach. The project has been withdrawn." I smiled for the first time in days. But I wasn't done. I invited a group of students from the local tribal college to come walk the property. A professor brought them, historians, archaeologists in training, environmental researchers. I gave them a tour of the garage. Showed them the blueprints, the maps. Let them walk the perimeter barefoot, the way my grandmother used to say the elders did, so the land could recognize them. Word spread. Soon, I had calls from people who wanted to document the site. Not develop it. Understand it. Meanwhile, Chase's reputation began to crack. I heard from a friend in town, one of the last remaining elders who still came to the farmers' market on Saturdays. "That boy's not getting any bites," he told me. "Folks talk. They say he missed something. Made a mess." Apparently, the investors Chase had boasted about. Gone. No one wanted a scandal tied to native land, especially not in a town finally waking up to its past. The irony? He'd triggered the very process that locked him out. If he'd stayed quiet, if he hadn't pushed, I might have left the documents buried in the garage for another 10 years. But now? Now the whole region knew. I got a letter from the preservation office congratulating me on protecting a critical cultural asset for future generations. They included a small grant. Enough to restore the porch. I laughed when I read that. The same porch Chase said was screaming to be torn down. One night, just before dusk, I sat on that same porch, sipping coffee from a mug my grandmother made. The air was warm. The hills cast long shadows. The wind shifted the tribal flag just enough that it sounded like breath. And from down the road, a car idled. SUV. Tinted windows. He was still watching. Still waiting. Still hoping I'd change my mind. I didn't wave this time. I just reached into the back of the truck, pulled out the same canvas bag he'd once mocked, and set it gently beside my chair. Let him wonder. Let him remember what was in the back. By summer, Chase was unraveling. You could hear it in the way his voice lost its luster during one of the last voicemails he ever left. I mean, what are you even gonna do with that land, Jed? Seriously? You don't have the money to do anything with it. You think it's noble, but it's just rotting. Click. He didn't call again. But others did. The local preservation office asked to install a marker on the eastern edge of the property, discreet, but official. A single stone slab, engraved with tribal insignia and a brief history of the Dakota site. They offered to install it for free. I agreed. 2 weeks later, it stood near the fence line, beneath a cottonwood. The inscription read: On this land, the Dakota people gathered. They remembered. They prayed. They built with hands that knew the earth, not for profit, but for legacy. People started coming, not crowds, but enough. Historians. Teachers. Even a few children on field trips, wide-eyed and quiet. They treated the land like it mattered. And I kept working. One morning, I found a letter in my mailbox, not from Chase, but from one of his former partners. A terse paragraph, handwritten on expensive stationery. He didn't tell us what was under that house. Lost us 2 clients and nearly $30,000 in planning fees. If you ever decide to sell, to someone who understands value beyond square footage, give me a call. I didn't respond. Chase's name began to disappear from signs. One development project down the road stalled out. Word was he'd been sued by another homeowner for misrepresenting zoning eligibility. His Instagram page, which once flaunted drone shots of transformed properties, fell silent. Meanwhile, I submitted the final application to list the property on the National Register of Historic Places. The paperwork took time. But every step of it was another nail in the coffin of his plans. You could almost feel him watching the land slip further from his reach. And mine. It wasn't slipping. It was standing taller. That fall, I was asked to speak at a community forum about cultural preservation. Not just for tribal properties, but for forgotten stories in general. I wore my only suit, brushed the dust off my boots, and spoke slowly, so they could hear every word. I'm not a historian, I told them. I'm not a developer. I'm a man who listened to the land. And it told me not everything needs to be changed to have value. They clapped. I didn't need applause. But I accepted it. I accepted it because it came not for a sale, not for a project, but for resistance. For patience. For memory. A month later, the final approval came, registered traditional cultural property, protected under state and federal law. It was official now. Permanent. And Chase? He drove by once more. Early December. Dusting of snow on the roof of my truck. I was on the porch again, resting, coffee in hand, the flag rustling quietly beside me. This time, he didn't get out of the car. He just looked. Maybe trying to remember how close he'd gotten. How easily he dismissed what he didn't understand. Then he turned around and drove off. And I watched the road behind him stay empty. I never saw him again. Winter came late that year. The hills behind the house held on to their colors longer than usual, gold stretching into December. The porch creaked beneath my boots one morning as I stepped out to find Chase standing at the edge of my driveway. Not in his usual SUV. He looked smaller than I remembered, coat too thin for the cold, jaw tight from whatever it took for him to show up here, again. He didn't wave. Didn't smirk. Just stepped forward, one hand buried in his pocket. "I know I don't have a right to be here," he said. I didn't answer. He glanced toward the garage, the same one he tried to pry into months ago, the same one that held the map, the documents, the truth he never bothered to ask about. "I got ahead of myself," he said. "Thought I understood this place. I didn't." Still, I said nothing. Just watched. He shifted on his feet. The investors pulled out. Word got around. I lost a few contracts. My firm's different now. I waited. Let the silence stretch. "You blocked me," he added, with a quick, hollow laugh. "I mean, I deserved it. I get it now." Another pause. "But I've been thinking. Maybe there's a way we could work together, something respectful. A heritage grant. Educational exhibits. You could keep it, but we'd help fund maintenance, build something out back. A storytelling center, maybe." I didn't move. "That's the problem with people like you," I said finally. "You think everything that endures must become content. Monetized. Measured." His expression tightened. "I'm trying to make peace." "No," I replied calmly. "You're trying to buy your way back into the story. But this story was never yours." He flinched like I'd hit him. I stepped off the porch, the gravel crunching beneath my boots as I walked toward him, slow, even. "This land doesn't need saving," I said. "It was never lost. You were just too arrogant to ask what it already was." He looked down, hands now both in his coat pockets. "I wasn't trying to disrespect anything," he murmured. "No." I raised an eyebrow. "You mocked my truck. My home. You stood on my porch and told me my life had expired." He shook his head. "I didn't know." "Exactly," I said. "You didn't know. And worse, you didn't care to." I let the word settle, like snow across empty soil. He looked up, eyes raw now. "So that's it?" "That's peace," I replied. "You walk away. You don't try to dig where you don't belong. You let the roots remain untouched." He nodded slowly. Then he turned. Walked back to his car, his steps heavier than they were when he arrived. Before he opened the door, I called out. "One more thing." He paused. "You ever tell someone else this land is for sale again? I'll make sure they know every part of what you tried to do." He gave a stiff nod. Didn't say a word. Drove away without looking back. And I stood in the cold, wind picking up against my coat, the quiet pressing in around me. But it wasn't an ending. It was the final lock turning. The house behind me stood firm. The flag above swayed gently. And somewhere beyond the trees, I swear I heard my grandmother's voice in the wind. Not angry. Not triumphant. Just settled. Just sure. Spring returned like a promise kept. The sage along the fence grew tall again. The cottonwood tree near the marker cast long shadows across the eastern path. For the first time in years, the land felt not just quiet, but content. I started opening the house once a season. Just for a few hours. Just for those who asked the right way. Students. Historians. Local families who'd lived nearby for generations but had never known what was here. I never charged. That wasn't the point. They'd walk through the rooms slowly, careful not to speak too loud. The floors still creaked. The air still smelled of cedar and ash and something older. And when they reached the garage, I'd show them the map. The blueprints. The old letters with smudged ink. Some of them cried. One young woman knelt beside the tribal marker out back and whispered a prayer. She stayed there for nearly an hour, unmoving, just listening to the wind. The truck still ran. I kept it clean now, waxed once a month with the same care I once gave to those kitchen tiles. I didn't patch all the rust, some things, you leave as they are. For memory. One of the kids from the college offered to repaint the side panel as part of an art project. I let him. He painted a feather wrapped in red thread, same as the one on the map. It looked right. I still lived alone. Still woke up early. Still made my coffee on the same old stove. But the house didn't feel as heavy anymore. I'd sit on the porch most evenings and watch the sun bleed across the ridgeline, turning everything to gold. Sometimes, people would pass and wave. A few would stop, ask questions, listen for a while. And I'd tell them only what needed telling. You kept it standing, one man said once. You saved it. But I shook my head. No, I said. It saved me. Because that's the truth of it. When they tried to take it, flatten it into something generic, convenient, profitable, I found out what it really meant to me. Not because I fought for it. But because it reminded me who I was. The quiet. The creaking boards. The truck bed holding more than scrap. The photos, the handprints, the stories passed without voice. That was the wealth. Not to be owned. To be honored. I planted a new rosebush that spring. Right near the porch. It bloomed slowly, soft white petals edged in pink, like breath on glass. I named it after her. After the woman who taught me to listen. To wait. To stand without shouting. And I tended it like the story it was. That summer, I got a letter from the tribal council. An invitation to speak at a gathering. Not as a leader. Not as a politician. Just as a keeper. That's what they called me in the letter. A keeper of place. I sat with those words for a long time. Not protector. Not warrior. Just someone who remembered. And who helped others remember, too. Sometimes, in the stillest part of night, I'd wake up and walk barefoot through the house. No flashlight. No sound. And I'd feel them. All of them. The ones who came before me. The ones who knelt in that soil long before there was a house. The ones who sang without language, prayed without audience, built without blueprints. I felt them in the walls. In the wind under the door. In the roots. And I'd whisper, just to them. I didn't let them forget you. Then I'd return to bed. The truck parked safe. The garden growing. The porch light glowing soft. And I'd sleep easy. For the first time in a long, long while. They came with blueprints. I answered with roots. They came with offers. I replied with silence. They came to measure value and profit, but I measured it in stories, stories held in beams and soil, in pages faded by time, in the curve of a rusted fender that once carried something sacred. He mocked what he could see. But he didn't know what I carried. Not in the back of my truck. Not in the folds of old paper. Not in the stillness I had learned to trust. He thought I was just an old man in a sagging house with tired eyes and a garage full of junk. But he didn't hear the prayers whispered between floorboards. He didn't feel the pull of history when the wind curled around the porch posts. He didn't know that sometimes, stillness is louder than defiance. And rust can be more enduring than steel. Because legacy doesn't shout. It waits. It waits beneath the dust. Beneath the ridicule. Beneath the assumptions. And when the time is right, it rises, not with fury, but with quiet certainty. And those who laughed. They forget. But I remember. And so does the land.